Welcome to Profiles. I'm your host, Dick Fredrickson, and our guest today is radio personality Frank O'Leary, the host of the Phone Forum. Frank, my good friend, welcome.
Thank you, Dick. I realized that Boris Yeltsin couldn't make it today for one reason or another, and Nancy, I should say Nancy, I'm thinking of her wife, Hillary Rodham Clinton couldn't make it, Frank Thomas couldn't make it. So, you know, you get to page 806.
But we have you, Frank.
Yes,
much more interesting. Now, Frank, I'm glad you began your little dissertation because I've got some rules for you before we begin. Rule number one is that you will not answer any of my questions with a yes, a no, or a maybe, or anything that we have to edit out later as we conclude the show.
Why?
I don't know if you've realized this, Frank, but you probably are a pioneer of the hottest radio format in America today. Talk radio.
Yeah, I've started 25 years ago. I've been there longer at the station than that, but 25 years ago, in August, as a matter of fact, we did our first program. And Bill Hansen, who was then our general manager, said, well, go ahead, it's yours. Do what you want with it. You know, and he gave me the idea. So, you know, I'd liked talk shows. I was always a fan. And then he developed a format, and that's really how it started.
The Phone Forum?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Now, Frank, before we get to turning too many pages of the history of Frank O'Leary in radio, let me stop the presses for a moment here and ask, what did Frank do before radio?
I went to college, started out at DePaul in Chicago, and went to the University of Illinois. And then after Illinois, I was involved with the family. We were in investment business, investment in real estate properties. And we had some theaters, we had some small hotels. And the family had been in that for a little while. I got involved with that, and then gradually we got out of that business. I'd always had the interest in radio, going way, way back. You know, you grew up listening to radio in Chicago, and I always had the interest. Never really did anything about it, never did any real theater work or anything like that when I was in high school or college, but I harbored that interest. And then the opportunity presented itself that there was the opening at JOL.
Okay. And actually, let me stop you for a moment because we want to turn those pages a bit later. Let's go to learn a little bit more about the Frank O'Leary that folks hear in the morning and they hear on Saturdays as you rotate every third or fourth or second Saturday. The profile of Frank O'Leary, we'd like to maybe focus a bit on the family. Tell us a bit about the O'Leary family.
Yeah, I never married, of course, unfortunately for me. My folks have since passed away. I had a brother who was a little bit older, 7 years older than I was in World War II, was discharged, went to medical school at the University of Kansas, was president of his fraternity, Phi Chi Medical Fraternity, and in the summer of 1946 caught polio, bulbar polio, and lasted 5 days. Now that was before the advent of Salk or Sabin vaccine. Today we hear about polio, but with the inoculation program, you don't hear about it as much in this country. So it was just my mother and I. My dad had passed away before that. Well, 6 months later, my dad passed away. So in our family, within 6 months, we had 2 deaths. And so my mother was involved with the businesses, and probably that helped her a whole lot. You never forget losing a son or a husband. And I was in high school at the time. I was a freshman going into my sophomore year in high school. I was a typical kid. I never got in trouble or anything of that, but I was a typical kid. So my mother really was my mother and my father to me.
Now, if I've got the years right, was this just after Depression years?
Well, this was 46.
Oh, so that's way,
I was born
these are war years.
Right. I was born in a Depression.
Yeah.
You know, all of us were. It seemed like we didn't know about it.
1946.
Well, 46 was the war was over. The war had ended.
But Frank, what I'm trying to get to, that if you were a kid in 1946, you were probably still a kid in 1945.
That's right.
Is that why you are still to this day Joliet's #1 Cub fan?
You know, I started out as a Cub fan, Dick, and I see more Sox games, probably, you know, 90-1. And today, I don't care if the Chicago Power wins. If it can't be the Cubs or the White Sox, I want the Bears, the Bulls, and the Blackhawks. I don't care. I'm at the stage in my life we need a champion in Chicago. We have to have it. It's been a while as far as World Series are concerned. We've had the Bears in 85, 86, and we've had the Bulls 3 times. We've had the White Sox 10 years ago, won their division. The Cubs won their division in 84 and 89. The White Sox again are in the playoffs. So I'll take any winner we can get.
Well, you know, that's an undercurrent that goes right along in Frank O'Leary's career, and that is not only the phone forum and the talk shows and the playing of the music and remotes, which we'll talk about later, but sports has played an important part of your career.
Yeah, I did football and basketball for about 22, 23 years. I did primarily Lockport football and basketball, Lincoln Way football and basketball, did Joliet schools too, and of course did Lewis University, St. Francis. I didn't do any 1 or 2 games. They didn't have a football program at that time. And I enjoyed it because we had some pretty good teams in those days. And Lockport, of course, 1978 state champions in basketball.
When you first started doing sports on WJOL,
It was FM. It was on the FM side.
was it the FM side?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
You know, it's interesting because we've got Don Lattis, JOL, who will be a future profile on the show.
Don did the AM games, I did the FM games. I did a few AM games too, but primarily was on the FM side.
You know, I don't recall the two of you ever doing any games together.
We did. Early on we did. We did them on the FM side early on, back for about maybe 2, 3 years. That was it. And then he went AM and I went FM. So
FM in those days was sports and...
That's right, a lot of sports.
Yeah.
A lot of sports. It was JOL FM, then of course subsequently became WLLI FM. And, but we worked together a couple of years on broadcast, that was all. Then he went AM and then I switched to the... He went AM and I switched to the FM, right.
Now, I think we have a few minutes before this next break. When you started with WJOL, what year was that?
1955. December of 55.
December of 55. Now, I can recall many years after that, when I started the radio, I know what I did. What did you do when you first got the job at JOL?
I started at about 11:45 and got off at around 5 o'clock. I did all music. It was primarily all music. And then for a while, I did the local news at 12:15. It used to be the big local news. I did that for a while and did sports, and so then I went flipping the disc and spending the shellacs the rest of the afternoon.
Were these were the 45s and the 33s, not the 78s?
Yeah, we had 78s. We had the old 78s, and of course the extended play, the 33s too. But we started out with the 78s, believe it or not.
And really not much tape.
Very little, if any, tape. Very little. And in 1959, we went to the tape decks. We were one of the first in the area to go to the tape decks. June of 59, I could remember it very, very well.
And you said when you were back in 55 that Bill Hansen was...
No, Bill wasn't there. It was Joe Novi, the late Joe Novi, and Jerry Cerny.
We're going to do some history on that, Frank.
Okay.
I want to go back so we get all these managers and owners that you've gone through, the years at WJOL, 1340 on the AM dial and 96.7 on the FM dial, WLLI right now.
You know, an interesting story, I got to tell you this.
Sure.
I realized that they went with the call letters, and they were country western originally at that time.
Yeah.
And then some other station came in the area and went country and western, and then we went to the...
So is Willie for country?
Yeah,
was that
was country, originally country, right.
And today it's contemporary
rock. Contemporary, like soft. I mean, it's not knocking out of your ear or anything like that. It's you can listen to it. It's good listening.
Yeah, it's a long way away from the music of Al Pollard, however.
Yeah,
a name from the past.
That's true.
And we'll talk about names from the past, both here locally and in the Chicagoland area as well. I think, you know, I'm new at this, Frank. I think we have a break coming up here, and I just feel like saying we'll be right back after these important messages with more of Profile. Welcome back to Profiles. I'm Dick Fredrickson, and my good friend Frank O'Leary is our guest today. We'll continue with our conversation. I keep looking around for Irv Cups in it, and the
He's
gang.
watching.
Yeah, he's watching, I'm sure.
He's watching.
You have been, and we touched on it earlier, Frank, we were talking about ownership. You have been through several owners, a couple, 3 or 4 managers, maybe just 2 or 3 managers, and a gazillion announcers.
That's true. Getting back to the announcers, I once sat down, Don Lattis always kids me about this, I sat down one time, and this was a few years ago, and Dick, I think I had gotten to about 175 or 200 people who have come through the building. Most of them were on-the-air people, a lot of office people, obviously, so probably it's even more now. I haven't done it for a while. When I started out in '55, Joe Novi and Jerry Cerny were the owners, and they were very active in the station. They had bought the station on January 1st, 1955. They sold the station June 1st of 1964 to Harris, which was an outfit out of Hutchinson, Kansas. Bill Hansen came in as the general manager. Harris kept the station, and Bill was general manager all those years, right up until 6 years ago, October of 1987, when the TZAC interest took over. In that time, we've had several program directors. I was a program director for a short period of time.
Were you? Congratulations.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had for a couple of years back in the 60s. And we probably, Dick, in the times as far as program directors, we probably have had maybe 6 or 7, which is surprising because usually I have more than that in 38 years.
How about morning men?
Oh, golly. Oh, probably 10, 12 morning men at one time or another, you know. I always worked basically the same shift, and that would have been late morning and afternoon. So I pretty much stayed the same shift all the time.
And they did that because?
They couldn't get anybody else to work it, so they gave it to me.
They also knew that you had to travel in from Chicago.
Yeah, that was probably a big factor. I spent a lot of time on the highways, going through a lot of cars and everything else. Yeah, that might have been one of the factors. Worked in the evenings only a couple of times, did early morning a little while. I'm not a morning person.
Well, of course, you're from Chicago, and the neighborhood you live in, which we'll talk about a little bit. Well, we can talk about it now if you want. The neighborhood you live in near Cubs Park.
Right near Cubs Park.
Yeah,
Can't park a car, but it's a nice neighborhood.
Well, you probably have the underground parking, valet parking for Frank O'Leary.
I park in the building because for years I parked outside, and I got tired of walking, a mile or half a mile in January and February. I got tired of that, so I decided to go into the building.
Well, our good friend Bill Drilling and Ralph Sherman and a couple of early morning DJs in the morning hours. Any others come to mind?
I remember Bill Herman. Bill passed away several years ago. He worked mornings. Al Collins was another fellow that I broke in with, helped to break me in. We've had several. Ted Ostrom worked mornings too for a while. We've had worked with a lot of fellows. Now Tony Ray, who's also our program director too, by the way.
Yeah, he's Joliet's thin man.
Yeah, this is, that's right. Going back a few years, he never passed up a meal.
I tell you, Tony's a good friend.
He's a big kid.
Yeah.
Big guy.
Yeah. Did he ever play any sports?
Yeah. Tony, when I first met him, Tony was a football and a basketball player at the old Joliet East High School.
Okay.
And that was a few pounds ago and a few years ago. So he was a pretty good athlete. Played Little League Baseball also. He was a pretty good athlete.
We'll see if we can get him on profile later on. We talked about remote broadcasts. You have done 1.3 million remote broadcasts.
Well, you got to remember, remote broadcast is any broadcast on radio that originates outside the studio. It could be across the street, it can be 19,000 miles away, and sometimes it's fun. Now, most of them we did were basketball games or football games. The fellow I worked most with, I think, was Bill Drilling, and I worked with Dick Dazenbrock, who worked nights for us. Paul DeLand used to be our news director. I worked with him for a while. Howard Divadak, he was our engineer, worked with him for a long time. So I worked with a lot of them.
Howard Divadak, he owns, has put up or constructed every radio tower this side of the Mississippi River.
That's true. He and another one of our ex-employees bought BUS in Kankakee and did some major engineering work, and they're a powerful station now.
Is that part of the Milner family?
That's right. He's since has sold. He does consulting work now. I haven't talked to Howard for a long time, but he and a fellow named Benny Chervin, who used to work for us, you might remember Benny, they expanded the station, actually, is what they did. But he's done work, towers, and if you remember on 57, that's that psychedelic tower.
The strobe lights.
You remember the strobe lights and everything else? So I worked with the remotes, getting interesting stories about remotes.
That's what I want to get to, Frank.
Don Lattis and I did a football game at Plainfield on a telephone pole. On a telephone pole.
Expand, please.
It was a beautiful day, and it was a day, you know, about 85 degrees on a Saturday during the football season, and they didn't have a press box in those days, so they accommodated us up on a telephone pole. And I like climbing, but I mean, my climbing days ended a long time ago. I've done them from rooftops, I've done them from the tops of press box, I've done them all over. You name it, we've done it for. I did it one time on a telephone at Providence because we had trouble, some kind of problem, and I could only see about 3/4 of the court. So vivid imagination trying to describe that. That's happened a couple of times where we had to go to the telephone right away.
How about election night? Do any early?
I have not done that much. The last couple of years, I was in Chicago at the Cook County building, so it wasn't as chaotic. I'd done some primaries. I remember I did, I think, the Kennedy primary and back in the 60s, Nixon, of course, and one or two others. We used to do them down at what is now the Renaissance Center. We used to make a production out of it. But I really haven't done that much. I've got it down to a science now.
Well, you mentioned the Renaissance Center. You did a show at noon at the Renaissance Center.
That's right.
Not too many years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Ralph Sherman started it, and then he left. And then Shar Anderson and I took the show over. And then Shar subsequently left, and I did the show alone. And then following that, I did the program, the same type of program from Al Steakhouse. We had a booth and everything else.
At noon?
At noon, yeah. And they would do it live on the FM, it seemed to me, and then they would tape it and replay it on the AM. It was good. I enjoyed it. You know, you break bread with people.
Sure.
It's a little different, and people would see us, and you'd see a lot of the same people in there. But I really enjoyed those shows.
Any particular personalities or characters or political folks that stand out that you've interviewed over the years?
Well,
in any one of those shows?
You know, one of the fellows I interviewed, I interviewed him at the Renaissance Center, but it was for another situation. It was Gene Cernan. And does that name ring a bell to you, Gene Cernan, one of the original astronauts?
Oh, yes.
The Rotary...
From the south side of Chicago, south suburbs.
Actually, Maywood.
Maywood,
yeah.
Okay.
The Rotary Club brought him in because he had gone to Purdue with a member of the Rotary Club. I think it was Dr. Talbot, as I recall, the dentist. And so they brought him in, and I found out he was going to be there, and I figured, boy, I'd love to talk to him afterward. So we made arrangements, and I listened to his speech, and then I had a chance to talk to him afterward. Now, this was probably 8 or 9 months before he walked on the moon. He was with the second group that walked on the moon. And that sticks out because, you know, here's a man, you knew of his past because of what he had done in the space program, and you knew that eventually he was going to be walking on the moon. Very nice guy, very interesting. And, you know, these were men among men. Let's face it, they were a great physical specimen. They were great mental specimens, too. And, of course, he did walk on the moon. I think either the second or third group. And I remember that interview, there were a lot of good interviews. That interview sticks out. And a lot of times we'd have a cancellation. Fran Dunn, the Joliet attorney, we would use Fran Dunn. And Fran Dunn, I've seen him in audiences, he just was spellbinder. He could tell stories. He told a story frequently about going to Washington, D.C. When the president, Kennedy, was shot, and he told that story because he had met him when he came to Joliet, and he stayed for a while at the old Louis Joliet Hotel. And I'd use Fran very frequently, and there were several other people. Judge Angela Pistilli was another one we'd see, and I'd say, stand by in case I need an interview. You know, and they were receptive.
It's a great comfort to have that.
It is, it is. And you'd see these people, and you know you could call on them, and they knew that they're more than willing, and they were interesting. They would talk, and that's all an interview is about.
Sure. You know, in 30 years of broadcasting, and you had the good fortune to be in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
And in Chicago, there were so many radio personalities. Radio from 1955 and prior to that when you listened to radio. Any of those radio personalities stand out as favorites?
Yeah, there is one that stands out, and he is perhaps better known for another aspect of broadcasting. And I'm talking about the late Bob Elson.
Oh, yes,
Bob
the commander.
Elson, the commander, had done Cub games, White Sox games, had done hockey and everything. He was a great interviewer, and he used to have a program from the Pump Room in Chicago that I would always try to catch, and sometimes they would play the tape in the evening, and I'd always try to listen. And I marveled at his technique. He was there, and he was the interviewer. He never cut in. He would let the person answer the question and then elaborate more. And I liked that. Maybe sometimes I cut in, I shouldn't do it. But I liked his interviewing technique. And of course, being in the Pump Room, he got pretty good people coming by. Jimmy Hoffa, believe it or not. I'm surprised Hoffa would ever submit to an interview, but he did. And he was interesting. And there were thousands of show business people that would come through. And years before, he had done a program on the old 20th Century Limited, which would come into Chicago from New York or California. It was the one train that went through. And they would stop in Chicago, and then he would get the people who were on the train and talk with them for 20 minutes or a half hour. And he had some of the biggest personalities in Hollywood. I remember Liz Taylor. And I always tried to listen to those programs because he did a good job, and he had good people on.
Well, I think we've caught a little revelation here, Frank. When you think about you listening to Bob Elston, the old commander, sports, talk show, Frank O'Leary, sports, talk show. I suppose
some similarities. But you know, he was in on the ground floor. He was in. He got into sports broadcasting when it was just beginning. And I remember interviewing him at Al's Steakhouse. And I had been told that he didn't like to talk about, you know, things away in the past. And I said, Bob, I'll never forget it. I said, you know, I grew up listening to Bob Elson like a million other kids did. And he said, yeah, I know it. And, you know, he talked, and he was very entertaining and very funny. Of course, sometimes we couldn't say the things on the air that he talked about, but
cigar smoker.
Cigar smoke, yeah. And he was a interesting interview.
Wouldn't he be great on the Sports Writers?
Oh, he'd be great. He would be great. I see they're coming back with almost the original cast now.
Yeah, look forward to watching that. We have just a few more minutes to go here, Frank. When you first came to Joliet, there was lots of involvement in the community. You were a member of the Elks.
I was past exalted ruler of the Elks, and I've been past president of the Board of Governors at Salem. I've been involved in a few committees, but you know, that's what it's all about, Dick. The community was good to me, and you want to repay in some small way, and believe it or not, I could never repay them for what it's meant to me. I've liked it. I've liked Joliet. I love Joliet. If I were to leave tomorrow, I'll have nothing but good memories. I've met a lot of nice people. Many of them are no longer with us, but these are people that left an impression on you, and I could never buy that kind of opportunity in a job situation. So I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for this community. It's a good community. It can only grow and grow and grow. And if we ever come back real estate-wise, we have the potential here, to me, is unlimited in the Joliet area, and that includes, you know, Bolingbrook and Romeoville and Lockport and New Lenox and Shorewood and, you know, all the communities around.
Well, you know, aside from a broadcasting career, Frank, you've been an ambassador for Joliet and Will County for 30 years as well, because folks can hear JOL throughout the southwest suburbs of Chicago. So it's a kind of a both-sided love affair with Frank O'Leary.
I hope so. I hope, and everybody I work with, I think we've all had a good spirit over there. And there were times, Dick, at JOL, we went one time 3.5, 4 years, nobody left. That's rare for a station our size, where they used to have, in a lot of places, revolving doors. We didn't have that at that time.
Well, radio's changing.
Yes.
It's Frank O'Leary is with WJOL 10 to noon, and then he produces the evening show in the afternoon.
1 to 2, and then I babysit for Larry King.
Larry King is on as well, and Frank, it's been delightful.
It's good seeing you again, and your charming bride, by the way, who I mentioned in relationship to Hillary.
Oh, yes, and she was very grateful for that.
Was that nice?
Well, that'll be for another show, Frank. Frank O'Leary on WJOL, 30 years broadcasting.
38 years.
Sig Sankowitz, by the way, celebrating some 50 years.
50
You've got a long way to go. We wish you the very best, and just great visiting with you.
Good to see you. Thank you very much, and I guess I'm the pioneer on the program, right?
Thanks again, Frank. Thank you very much.
Dick, nice seeing you. Thank you very much.
And we invite each and every one of you to join us again here on Profiles. I'm Dick Fredrickson. Our guest tonight's been Frank O'Leary. The next time, we hope to be talking to someone that you ought to know right here on Profiles. Welcome to Profiles, everyone. I'm Dick Frederickson, and we think we have a very good show lined up for you today. Tony Ray is our guest. I'm Dick Frederickson, and welcome to Profiles. Tony Ray, Program Director, Morning Guy on WJOL, Program Director of WJOL and WLOI. We welcome you, Tony, to the show.
Thank you very much. I've seen the show many times and enjoy it.
Thank you. Well, we've listened to you a few mornings, getting up at that hour and listening to the news and all the things the Ray Man has. Incidentally, I believe my research shows me that you are the creator of the early morning radio happy birthday greeting. Is that true?
You know, it seems like that's become my claim to fame. Happy birthday. You're right.
Well, you're probably the only disc jockey, announcer, program director anywhere that could really sing without sound effects backing you up. And there's a lot of folks watching this show who will say, oh yeah, Tony Ray woke me up on such and such a morning. It's a kind of a fun thing. We'll talk more about the radio end of it. Incidentally, for the viewers, Tony, is Tony Ray your real name?
Anthony. So it is actually my real name.
Okay. So
I get that question a lot. A lot of people don't believe that. I think it's a fake name, but no, it is.
Well, a lot of guys on the air do not use their real name. And,
correct.
So it's Anthony Ray, Tony Ray, morning guy on 1340 on the AM dial. What's the hours? 6 to
5:30 a.m.
5:30.
Yeah, until 10.
Till 10. All right, 5:30 to 10. I didn't know you were up at that hour, Tony. All right, good.
Sometimes I'm not, but I'm there.
How long has Anthony Tony Ray been in the broadcasting business?
It's a good question. I got to backtrack because it actually started in 1976, I believe it was, 77. At I'm sure you remember WJRC radio. Started there and I've been doing it ever since.
What were you doing at WJRC when you first started?
Actually, I began on my own. I bought time and did a gospel show at WJRC. At that time, Bob Wheeler was the general manager. And then that moved into doing a lot of sports things for the morning team there. I started doing sports and actually was working for WJRC. Then about a year later, I went over to WJOL.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to that, but one of the reasons, Tony, I asked that question is that we've got youngsters who will watch the show and who may be going to college or maybe going to broadcast school, etc., and wondering, well, how do I begin? How do I become the morning guy on WKRP? And it begins with steps.
Oh, yeah, I guess. A lot of it I just wanted to do. It was something I wanted to do. I started in high school, actually, doing the broadcast teams and different things that we had at high school. It was something Tony wanted to do, and my love for gospel music. I said, well, I'm going to go out. I went out, I bought time, sold advertising for that time to compensate what I was paying, of course, and went on the air that way because it was something I wanted to do.
How old were you then?
17.
17 years old.
Maybe 16, 17, it's in that area.
Okay.
It's fading on me right now.
I doubt that. Well, we've been talking with a group of folks who've come by the old bookcase room.
Yeah, and I like the books too, by the way. I want to borrow Rise and Walk.
You got it. After the show, you take it. Born and raised in Joliet. And I want to spend a little time now with you, Tony, in those early years. You say born in Old St. Joe Hospital.
Oh, yeah. Don't remember much about it. They tore it down right after I was born.
But here are some memories you will remember, and we hope you'll share with us. Grade schools in Joliet, where'd you attend?
Went to Liza Kelly on South Chicago's McDonough Street. Liza Kelly was a kindergarten at that time. And at that time, I guess affirmative action became a big thing and became bused to Sheridan grade school, which is no longer in operation anymore, but was bused first grade through fifth grade to Sheridan. Then went to Washington Junior High School for 3 years in Joliet East.
Okay, now Joliet East isn't with us anymore.
Have you noticed my track record here? Old St. Joe's no longer around. Sheridan no longer around.
Well, we're going to stop at that. We're going to stop at that because the future is bright for Tony Ray because the background is brilliant, Tony. But before we go on with more of your career, let's go back to Washington Junior High and JT East and a couple of memories. What was it like going to school in Joliet? As you say, now there's affirmative action going on. Things are changing. Things are happening. What was it like growing up in Joliet and being a student of at that age, that era?
I was a kid. I loved it. I was a kid, and I acted as a kid. You know, played basketball and sports in high school. I guess in junior high and high school, that's the thing I mostly remember, to be honest with you. The friendships that were made with the basketball team and the football teams. And believe it or not, to this day, I still have those friendships with a lot of the guys I played with. Really, that's that and the church end of things, which I'm sure you know about.
Well, don't leap ahead of me here now. You're just like Frank O'Leary did on the show here. Let's stay with the school episode, because all my research is going to go step by step.
Okay.
With you, Tony.
Well, actually, like most of the time in school, it was sports and speech. Believe it or not, I loved the speech. I was on the speech team, won the first place in the state in the speech team my 8th grade year in Washington Junior High School. And then I always enjoyed English. I was in different clubs like that. Never got involved with the fine arts departments, but always stayed, again, within the sports area.
So the voice you have, the diction you have, the articulation you have today didn't just drop out of the sky for Tony Ray.
No, it didn't. My mother would be the first to tell you that I had a very bad speech impediment when I was a youngster growing up. She didn't think I ever was going to talk, actually. She took me to a speech therapist, had a list, and stuttered quite a bit. I guess Washington Junior High School started to pull that out, dealing with the speech team.
You were a 4-letter guy?
At Joliet East.
At Joliet East? Mm-hmm. What, basketball, baseball?
At high school, basketball and football.
Okay.
And Ingalls Park baseball.
Okay, yeah, you played baseball at Ingalls Park, and what is it?
With Bill Gullickson.
Yeah.
And Jesse Barfield on the same team.
Isn't that something? Did you guys win?
Yes, we did, actually. They were a little better than I were.
Do you keep in contact? You said before you did.
I'm in touch with Jesse Barfield occasionally. Bill Gullickson, I see him every now and then.
Well, if you show up at those Old Timers Association events, you probably see Bill Gullickson. He's usually with Don Lattis and Frank O'Leary at those. Okay, well, you're into sports and into speech, and you mentioned at the very beginning of the show that you were doing some broadcasts while you were in high school. Tell me about that.
I think it was WCCQ radio at that time. Had high school, I don't remember the name of it, but high schools came in and had to produce their own 30-minute show. A friend of mine, Lane Lindstrom, and myself put together Joliet East 30-minute show every week. And that's how that began in high school.
And Lane Lindstrom now, I think, is the
chief operator for about
8 stations.
100 stations.
Every station that you can listen to in the suburban area, from Joliet south and west, I think Lane is the engineer.
Exactly.
Well, you continue your education at a well-known Chicago institute, DeVry Institute. What's the proper name?
DeVry Institute of Technology.
Right. And today, that's really the place to go. And so many students are coming out of that and filtering into cable and television and radio and electronics. That, by the way, I did not know. The years I worked with you, I didn't know that you were one of those engineer types.
Yeah.
What we do want to know from you, Tony, is a bit about your family. I think before we take the break, let's spend some time. Tell us about your family, Tony.
Super dad, super mom, and I have one brother. Grew up in a very religious atmosphere. My brother and I were in church every Sunday, every Tuesday, every Friday, and whenever the doors were open, Tony and Harold was following Mom to church constantly. Dad was a big sportsman, still is. He loves bowling and golf, and I was the only sportsman in the family. My brother was the astute one, the straight-A student, and Tony was the other guy into sports, and Dad and I was constantly going to sports events. I don't think my father missed too many of my ball games, whether football or basketball, unless he had to work. And that was very few and far between. Mom was and still is, the stabilizing factor and the instituting of that spiritual. Mom is very, very, very spiritual. And to this day, she'll sit there, Tony, you go to church? What are you doing? You know, she's going to keep you in church. And my brother right now is the pastor and founder of Redemptive Life Ministries in Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, that's great, Tony.
Yeah.
That's great. Palm Beach, Florida. And when was the last time you were in church in Palm Beach, Florida?
2 weeks ago.
Great. Well, let me ask you this. By the way, before your pastor calls up the studio here, what church is that you're attending?
What church? Actually, I'm kind of twofold. I guess I've explained that a little bit. I'm a member of All Nations Church of God in Christ. Elder Robert Sanders is the pastor.
Okay.
And I am minister of music for Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church in Lockport. Reverend House is the pastor there, and I've been there for about 10 years. 12 years.
10 or 12 years. So that keeps you busy with church work, both in Joliet and in Lockport.
Right, very.
Okay. Let's get the locations. All Nations located where?
South Water Street, Joliet. 503 South Water Street.
And Shiloh?
200 Reverend James W. Walton Drive in Lockport.
Okay, where is that close to? Give a little geography lesson.
Right at the top of Riley's Hill, almost.
Okay. If I can ask Kirk, we'll do this really technically. Kirk, give me a signal. How much? What time do I have here? Another minute or so, or are we getting close to the break here? Okay, we've got about a minute, I think, to go here, Tony. I don't want to break in the middle of something here. Well, I know you were talking about first jobs in radio, but you had another job before getting into. You had a couple other jobs before getting into radio.
Yeah, believe it or not, I wanted to be a draftsman.
Yes, I saw that.
I wanted to be an architect, and that was my first love. And my first ever job was working for the Will County Regional Planning Commission as a draftsman, and that was at age 16.
And then you also spent a little time with the Herald News?
Yes, I did, as a district manager. Did I write that down?
Oh, that's our research department. We don't leave anything uncovered here.
Okay, yeah, district manager for the Joliet Herald News when I was 18.
Okay, so draftsman and working with the Herald News and buying your own time on WJRC, getting out on the streets and doing it the old-fashioned way of getting that time bought and then paying for it on your own. So there's lots of blood, sweat, and maybe a tear or two shed along the way as the early career of Tony Ray. By the way, a career that is just really beginning. You're going to go a long way, Tony.
Thank you.
This is not that this is your life. This is just to get to know you a bit better here on Profiles. We have time, I think, to go back to, well, we don't. How about that?
Kirk Wheeler's giving you the...
You know what we're going to do? We're going to wrap this segment up because I want to find out more about WJOL and your work with the youth here in Joliet and a bit more about the church as well as we continue to learn a bit more about Tony Ray, Program Director and Morning Guy on WJOL. Well, we're back with more Profiles, talking with Tony Ray, our WJOL Morning Guy, Program Director. And Tony, the next set of questions I have for you, I'll be able to test you because I was there.
Uh-oh, here we go.
What did you do back in 1978, 79? What happened then? From WJRC, you...
My beginning years at WJOL, I remained in school for when I was going to Joliet Junior College as a full-time student. And at the same time working at the Herald News as a district manager and working part-time at WJOL, working in sports originally.
You know, you're jarring my memory now because I now recall you working for the Herald News because on occasion you would bring a truck in to the parking lot. And it's all now flashback time.
Working part-time, started in sports originally, and then it started off on Sunday afternoon show once a week, really.
What were you doing in sports at that time?
Doing color at that time with Larry Ryan, then Jim Bowles, then Ron Gleason.
And Ron Gleason, okay. Larry Ryan in advertising now. I don't know where Jim...
He's in law. He's a lawyer now.
An attorney. Yeah. And Ron Gleason's...
sports director for The Score in Chicago.
Yeah, The Score. People have lots of fun with Ron Gleason. Remember Ron Gleason never talked to anyone in the morning hours?
He would not talk until afternoon. He would not talk to anyone.
But he grew out of that one.
Yeah.
And talking to everybody in Chicago now. What do you recall as your early years at WJOL? Just part-time, working there, balancing the Herald News job, going to Joliet Junior College and studying what?
Journalism at the time.
Okay.
At Joliet Junior College.
What was it like doing all that?
Hectic. Very hectic, but fun. Yeah. When you're 18, you can do anything, and that's what what I was really doing at that point. I worked as a district manager for only about a year until I was 19, and then I gave up that job and went and got another job at the YMCA as a supervisor. But juggling all that was not that difficult, really. Went to school during the day, worked middays, and then worked nights at the radio station.
Yeah. And the supervisory position at the Y, was that the downtown Y?
The one on Brick Street had just opened. Yeah.
Brand new one. Good opportunity out there. Well, let's take time out here for just a moment. And I said earlier we're going to get philosophical.
Yeah, that scares me.
Just a moment. But Tony, I think, you know, a lot of people, because of your visits to school and your exposure to the school system here in Joliet, and a lot of guys are looking at role models these days. You've mentioned it in so many words, but can we encapsulate it a bit about your philosophy of work?
Oh, you've got to work hard at whatever you want to achieve. Whether it's work or not, Dick, you know, you've set a goal for it and you've got to really work to achieve it. It's not going to be, as you mentioned before, it's not going to fall out of the sky. My philosophy toward work is you step. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get past those first 2 steps, that's great. But for the most part, you got to start on the bottom rung and keep working until you reach the top.
Let's get romantic. What is Tony Ray's first love, of which you mentioned earlier as well?
First love.
Yeah. I'll fill in the blanks if you think you're in dangerous territory.
No, my first love, probably music.
That's it. That's the one. And I want to get a little more detail. When did you first get into this whole genre of music? And I've got the answers here. So.
Oh, I know very well. I told you, Mom drug us to church every day, and I started playing the drums in church when I was about 5, 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
Playing drums, and then that moved off into keyboards.
Keyboards, and I have down here drums at age 7, and of course because you were at church you also played keyboard and the organ at church, and at age 9 in that territory. Did you take formal lessons?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, you may know the lady who gave me my first organ lesson was Joyce Hecht, and she's a receptionist at the Joliet Herald News to this day. I keep in touch with all my contacts, as you can see. Ralph Zuppa a little bit as well too. But yeah, formal lessons, and I only took lessons for approximately a year. I wasn't into it, put it that way, at age 9, and I took it for a year. My mother said, Tony, you're not doing anything. I wasn't practicing, and so I gave it up. And then about 4 years later, went back into it.
So you mixed sports with music and education and all of that. Good mix. Okay. Now you've got, as we said on the credits as we open the show, you're the program director at WJOL. You're 5:30 a.m. to 10 in the morning, and a myriad of, well, let me ask you, what does a program director do? What do you do at WJOL?
I can answer that question. I can go for an hour on that, or I can answer it very shortly. I guess the best...
Very shortly.
I figured that's what you wanted. The best way to explain that is whatever you hear on the radio is my responsibility. Whatever you hear, it's for me to create it if possible, or if something goes wrong, it falls back on my shoulders.
Okay. And whatever you don't hear.
Oh, exactly.
Also ends up
falls back on my shoulder.
Well, you were also mentioning earlier that you're with Shiloh, and you're the chief musician, minister of music at that church. What does that all entail? What are you doing with that?
That's a very, very busy part of my life, actually. We've got a 100-voice choir at Shiloh Baptist Church. As far as dedicated members, maybe about 80, but it's a choir roll of about 100. And trying to keep 100 voices going constantly, and we have a very hectic schedule. We've built the choir, and the choir now sounds very good, if I don't mind saying so myself. And now, because of that, our hectic schedule keeps us running quite a bit in different engagements here and there, and then you're constantly practicing.
So you're going beyond your church with your choir?
Constantly.
Okay, to where? Other churches?
Oh, we've sung a lot of other churches, churches through the Chicagoland area, throughout Chicagoland and Joliet. We've done the telethons. We do nursing home visits quite often. It just goes here, there, and everywhere, really. We take it to the street a lot of times, too.
You are, we'll announce it here, and that way we'll apply pressure to Roger Connor. You're hoping and putting together a gospel program, hopefully someday, putting that package together?
That's something I've always kind of wanted to do, and the opportunities here at Continental Cable, Roger, they avail themselves, and I think they will in the future, so we get some things ironed out and some other things. Be able to put together a nice gospel video show, because gospel music has come such a long way, and now they got gospel videos out, which you didn't see 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, and You are also, I find out in our research department, teaching and directing Joliet Central High School kids in music here too.
It's an extra activity. Every Tuesday I go to Joliet Central and teach their gospel choir, this new era contemporary choir, for 1 hour. And they have a lot of engagements as well around the area. And as of next year, I'll be teaching Lewis University gospel.
I heard that. Now let me back up just for a moment here, because this is really interesting. You're in a public high school, and you're teaching a gospel choir.
Extracurricular.
Extracurricular activity. So it's after school you're doing,
Correct.
or before school,
After
or
school.
during lunch or something?
It's right after school at 3 o'clock on Tuesdays. And we do a myriad of music, Wind Beneath My Wings, and things like that. The positive style of music plus gospel.
And where do these kids perform?
We have performed, oh boy, I can't even begin to tell you. Quite a few, a lot of the junior high schools we've been at, Black History Month celebrations we've been at, different churches we've even been at.
Right. And you mentioning Lewis University, something coming up for next fall?
Yeah, I'll be teaching their gospel choir at Lewis.
Did you participate? Of course, this is a timeless tape here.
The Gospel Fest.
Right,
Yes,
so that was last week.
Right, end of May.
End of May. End of April.
End of April, yeah.
1994.
There we go.
The Union Gospel Choir, and you have also, and we'll do a little bragging for you, you've done some studio work. You've worked with some of the nationally known gospel singers in the country. Briefly touch on that. Who were some of these people, and what was it like?
This is one of the top gospel artists, I think, right now, black gospel artists, is a group called the Winans. Had a chance to spend some time with them years ago. I brought them to town, and they performed. You know, it was interesting. At that point, I think I had the Winans for a very meager price to do a concert here, and I couldn't touch them for anything. After a few Grammys and things like that, you can't touch them anymore. But I had a nice experience with the Winans, Vanessa Bell Armstrong, a group called the Williams Brothers, and a great gospel keyboardist called Ben Tankard, who I was with doing a workshop with approximately 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Good. And you are participating, and you are working with and involving with the youth of Joliet as well, working with inner city youth. How are you doing that, Tony? Is that probably with the music, or
both? Actually, I think music goes a long way in reaching our youth, or at least getting in the door. You know, you can go down there, but if you got something to go down there with, otherwise I'm talking about a street ministry. Maybe I've taken the choir down the 2nd and Richard Street, which they call a very embattled area of this area. We've gone down there on a Saturday afternoon and just sang and had a good time with the inner city youth of the community. Just sang all afternoon long. We do those type of things. I pull up on the street corners, play basketball with them maybe at times, or just talk with them. I guess I've been doing that more or less over the last year, got more involved with it over the last year than I ever have.
Good. Who or what made a difference in your life, Tony? That, you know, why is Tony Ray where you're at today? Was there a person that did that? Was there an event that took place?
I have no qualms to be my mother.
Mom played that key role in directing and putting you on direct target. Well, with that in mind, what about some advice now for kids listening in, parents listening in? Would you have some advice for the kids growing up in today's world?
I guess the best advice would be to parents to get involved with their kids' lives. See it so many times, time and time again now, with the kids, the troubled kids, they don't have a home base. Parents really don't even know what their children are doing. So I think the parents have really got to get involved with their children's lives. And then if that works out, I think the rest will come very easy. At that point, the kids have a respect for mom and dad. At that point, also, the kids have a base of understanding and morals. Then at that point also, I think at that point the kids can start looking for goals and try to achieve those goals.
Okay. Tony, I'm going to give you some rapid fire. You've watched, what is that, Firing Line or something on CNBC. I'll give you some real quickies as we wrap up the interview.
Is time gone already?
It's almost there, but not
I've been
quite.
definitely afraid of this show, you know that.
I can't believe that. Favorite artist, recording artist?
Winans.
The Winans. Last book you read?
Oh, God, I knew you'd tell me that, and I can't think of it either.
Last movie?
Movie I saw was Shaquille O'Neal, and what was that movie?
Why? My short-term memory.
Yeah, it's Shaquille O'Neal in the basketball movie.
Okay.
With Nick Nolte.
Favorite athlete?
Over the rim. There we go.
Over the rim. Favorite athlete?
Billy Williams.
Billy Williams. Still a diehard Cub fan, I'll tell you. You're a last of a breed, Tony.
Thank my dad for that.
I want to thank you for coming by and visiting with us on Profiles. We hope you've enjoyed knowing Tony Ray just a bit better here on Profiles, and stay tuned. We'll have more coming your way, more Profiles. I'm Dick Fredrickson. Take care, and God bless. Welcome to Profiles. I'm Dick Fredrickson, and our very special guest today is Don Lattis. And Donald, welcome. Don Lattis, I'm going to read from the notes. Don Lattis, 40 years, young fella, in broadcasting, 40 years with WJOL Radio. Member Illinois State Bowling Hall of Fame, Joliet Junior College Hall of Fame, Will County Bowling Hall of Fame, and back in 1978, you were Man of the Year here in the Joliet area. We thought you'd like to know Don Lattis a bit more. I'm sure you've heard his voice on WJOL Radio. Perhaps you've picked up his paper, the Will County Sportsman, and in one way or another, if you've lived in Joliet for more than 2 or 3 days, you have probably either heard or read about this gentleman. And if you've just moved in, we welcome you, and you're going to get to know someone who you'll be hearing and reading in the upcoming years that you live here in the Will County area. Don, I'm really pleased to have you here at the old bookcase. We didn't put any trophies up for you, but
no trophies, no sports books,
no sports.
What
We've got one book in here. Oh, well, we have one. Yes, we have one.
Hey, that's great. It's nice of you to ask me, really, Dick. It's a real pleasure to be with you, and we had a lot of great years together, working together, and been friends for a lot of years.
Well, that's going to make things a lot easier for us tonight, because we're going to ask you some real good questions. I made it through the Frank O'Leary interview. I can do you as well.
This should be easy then.
Well, let's start with a little bit of background on you, Don. How about with the family? You're married. Your wife. How many years?
It'll be 33 years, November 11th, Armistice Day. They made a big deal about it when it happened, and a lot of bets that it wouldn't happen, and it was a holiday, and so on and so forth. And 33 years, well, I can't believe that either. And I have 3 great kids, 23, Sherry, 21, Angie, 19, Donnie, and I didn't have a gray hair in my head until I had my first child. No, it's been great. The kids
well, we want to make sure that we get Mary Lou's name out
Oh, yeah,
there.
let's do that. And I met her at the station also, so I owe a lot to WJOL, I really do. I met Mary Lou when she was just out of high school, come up there, and she happened to have a desk right next to me, and before you know it, we were going out, and the next thing you know, we're married, you know.
Okay.
She married the old guy.
Excuse me. Well, with all those almost 33 years of marriage, let's start the program out with Don Lattis. Dr. Don, how about some marital advice for our viewers out there? We've asked folks who've been married a long time if there's something that you could just pass along to folks.
I can pass along that she's been unbelievable, loyal. You know, she's been with me right from the start. She knew what she was getting into at the beginning, because like all of us, we're busy. You know, I was always involved with sports and always doing games and always going here and going there, and opened up the Chalk and Q billiard hall.
Now, don't get ahead of me here.
Okay,
now.
and
Don't
so
get
on and
ahead
so
of me.
forth. But all I can say is she's really been my right arm.
Your partner.
She's like they say, you got to be partners, you got to be buddies, you got to be friends. And I think in all criteria, we are.
Great. Now, we wish you another 33 years coming up.
I hope you're right, too, Dick. I wouldn't mind being around for 33
Absolutely. You know, this is another surprise to folks, although you didn't spend a whole lot of time there. Where were you born?
Born in Chicago. Wasn't there very long. On Cottage Grove Avenue, in fact. About 6 months, 5 or 6 months, they tell me, and my family then moved to Joliet, because already my dad and mother met at an old ice cream parlor in downtown Joliet, Blacey's. My dad came over from Greece when he was 13 years old. My mother's from Seneca, Illinois, so that's quite a connection. But they met working together in a downtown restaurant here in Joliet, Illinois.
What's your mom's nationality?
German, Norwegian.
German Norwegian.
German Norwegian, right. My dad, of course, is full-blooded Greek
Yeah.
and Grecian, and I'm very lucky to have that kind of a background. Two fine people, two great people.
So your dad left Greece at age 13.
Right, 13 years old, came over here to this country, and I could have never done it. He went only 3 years to grade school. He went to 3rd grade. But he had more street moxie than I'll ever have, and as most people who knew him here in Joliet, and a lot of people still remember him, he was as just a fantastic guy. He said, mix with everybody, do what you want to do. He ran a restaurant. He worked at the old sweet shop, and then he bought the Busy Bee restaurant in downtown Joliet.
We're going to travel down those trails with what your dad
right
did and the family as well. Don, your education, St. John's, St. Pat's, here in Joliet, graduate of
Joliet Township High School, 1947.
Where Central is now, or
Right,
JT
exactly.
is now, really.
Exactly.
Okay. And then on to, well, same building, Joliet Junior College,
2
right?
years at Joliet Junior College, great school, outstanding, had a great time there. 6 years in the same building.
Okay, and then on to
Bradley University.
you and Jack Brickhouse, right?
Well, I'll tell you that Jack Quinlan was down there. A lot of really great sports people. Not that I put myself in that category, but a lot of sports folks came from that area. That another Vince Lloyd also was at Bradley University, and just a whole lot of people came from that area and ended up doing some great sports work in the local area.
What was it like growing up in Joliet when you were going to, let's say, from all the way from St. John's, St. Pat's, and then you were going to JT? Briefly, what was it like for Don Lattis growing up?
It was a lot of fun. I was a real little guy, and I took a lot of beating, you know, from here and there. Like my brother used to say, I don't care, you know, I can beat him up whenever I want, but I don't want nobody else touching him. So my brother Chuck really took good care of me. And I went to 7 years at St. John's, and then we moved to the west side, lived on Bluff Street. My dad had a restaurant right in that corner of Bluff and Jefferson. I sold papers out in front there, had a penny a paper, used to make like $1 or $2 every Saturday night selling papers. And then we moved up to 106 Caesar Street, and so I transferred over to St. Patrick's Grade School, where I graduated in 1943, and then went to Joliet Township High School for 4 years. And as we mentioned before, then Joliet Junior College, then Bradley University, and then fortunately got very, very lucky to get a job at WJOL, thanks to Mike Dudinsky.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that. Mike Dudinsky was the fellow who said, you know, why don't you give it a shot? But in 1954,
54,
correct?
right out of college.
What was it, his influence, or what made you say yes to Joe Novi and Jerry Cerny, who were the owners of WJOL?
Exactly. Well, they called me. I had got a quick job right out of college with sports editor, and also sold some advertising for the Lockport Herald, little newspaper, a weekly newspaper.
Not affiliated with
Not
the
at
Herald,
all, with
right?
anybody.
Okay.
No, it was out of Lamont, in fact, where they had put out a lot of little papers in that particular area. And Joe Novi, and well, he called me and asked me, he said, we just got a good recommendation from Mike Dudinsky, who they wanted to work. By the way, Mike Dudinsky is an uncle of Tom Deeden, who is of sports fame in the local area. And Mike did not want to switch jobs. He had an advertising agency and also worked for the Herald News in advertising. And he was very happy with his job. He said, I got a fellow that will fill the bill for you. And he recommended me. They called me up to the station, and they asked me a few questions and so on and so forth. I told them I had no experience at all in radio. My degree was in journalism from Bradley, and so on and so forth. Never sold you know, any radio time. But they said, we want you as our sports director, and also you'll have to sell time. We want to build up our sports programming, and they say that possibly you could do the job. I said, I'll give it a shot. And 40 years later, I'm still at the same job.
You're still doing the same job, and I'm going to fill in some blanks for the folks as to how you do that job and some of the projects that have been with you along the way, and especially Vance and folks that you've met and have been with you for some of those 40 years. But let's go back a bit to the family, to the Lattis family. You mentioned your dad and your brother. Your family were very much involved in Joliet, in sports and in business. Your dad, as you mentioned, owned restaurants in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right.
That's the Busy Bee, and that's still a restaurant. Is that still a
right
restaurant?
now they call it Oscar's downtown. It was a country cottage or country something downtown.
Right on Chicago?
Right at 221 North Chicago Street, right across from the Eagle Furniture Store.
Okay. And your brother Chuck managed for you, I believe you owned it,
right.
The Chalk and Q.
And Archery too. At 123 East Van Buren Street, the old Bowl Era building. And we first had a place over on Cass Street, the old Sands Health Studio. Real quickly too, Dick, if you don't mind. The way that started, I was sitting in the steam room down at the old Joliet YMCA with Al Greenberg. And I said, hey, Al, you think a good billiard hall, good family billiard hall would go good in this town? He said, it sure would, Don. I got just the place for you. He owned the building, and just a few weeks before, Sands had moved out overnight. They left this beautiful place with rugs, mirrors on the wall, just an outstanding place, and it was just a natural. Unfortunately, after about a year and a half, the place burned down. Just bingo like that, and so I waited a few more months, and Chuck and I, my brother, who I couldn't have done without. He was the real secret to the business. He was a tremendous guy. And so we opened up the place over in the old Bowl Air. We bought from Joe Rubinitz and Danny Hillman. Of course, Danny and the Midas.
It was 17 years in
yeah,
that
we were
business?
there from 61 through 78. I lost my brother in 1975. I had to make the decision then whether either to stay with the radio station, which I really enjoyed, and moving around and doing all the things that I did do and still do, or rather be cooped up in one place, which we were doing very, very fine financially, but I just made the decision. I tried to lease the place out on paper. A couple of things didn't work out with the people that I talked to, and so I finally sold it in 1978. John Haniotis put a Cadillac business in there.
That's right, yeah. And your uncles and your dad opened the very first, what we call big, really recognizable bowling alley in Joliet as well.
Right down in Chicago Street, right next to where the Rialto is now, was upstairs. It was Lattis Brothers, first of all, and then after a few years after they sold out, I understand they turned it into the Hub Recreation. A lot of people recognize that name. They had a lot of pool tables up there also, and also, of course, bowling lanes.
So Lattis is a name, uncles, dad, brother, the family is in business in Joliet.
It's in the blood.
It's in the blood. And you continue that with radio, sports, and sales, and with newspaper as well. And we'll touch on that as well. A little inside thing here. I missed the signal. Are we overtime? Do I have 30 seconds? What time do we have here? It's perfectly okay. I'll talk to you. I got time. Okay. Donald, now they tell me we have 1 minute. Okay.
Not 1 minute left.
1 minute left of this segment.
Oh, okay.
In this segment. Today they are promoting lady boxing at the Rialto. They just had it a little while ago. Now,
I want my daughters to be boxers.
Hold this thought, because we're going to come back to it. But you were promoting boxing in Joliet as well, and I did not know that.
Exactly.
And we're going to find out just how you did that, and maybe some of the bouts,
boxers?
the boxers that you had in the Joliet in the 60s and 70s. Don Lattis, memorable bouts and events in boxing with Don Lattis here on Profiles. I told you this is going to be a good interview, and it's fast-paced, and Don and I go back a few years, and we hope you're going to enjoy the second half of Profiles as much as we enjoyed visiting with each other in the first half. So we're going to take time out, have a couple of messages. You know what those are, Don. We'll have a couple of commercials.
Pay the bills.
And pay for this time, and then we'll be right back with more Profiles with Don Lattis and your old host here, Dick Fredrickson. Be right back. Welcome back to Profiles. I'm Dick Fredrickson, and our guest is Don Lattis. And Donald, we've got a lot of territory to uncover here for you. We were talking about boxing in the first segment. You promoting boxing back in the 60s and 70s. Any memorable fights that you're going to tell us about?
Yeah, we had a lot of great time. Frankie Keener and I. Frankie was a policeman in town here and a fine boxer in his own right. And we promoted some matches up at Joliet Catholic High. We had Billy Boy Thompson, Joe Bennett, George Blunt, people of that caliber. Really outstanding. We filled the houses all the time. And it was just something that I can't believe that they let go for so long, Dick, because we did very well. And if I had the time, I'd still been doing it myself. But finally, somebody's doing it in Joliet here, and I understand the Rialto did pretty doggone good.
Ernie Terrell, I think, is the
Ernie
promoter
Terrell.
of
He's a
these
former
boxing,
heavyweight boxer in his own right, you know.
Well, you and Tony Ray can probably put it together and get it back at Joliet's JT now, Central. And,
I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
You know, just time is of essence these days, though. You know?
Well, speaking of time, you have spent a great deal of time broadcasting, I think, every sport known to man. You have either, well, you broadcast all of them. And I have a couple here that I want to ask you how you did it. Down on the list, you've got golf, archery, and billiards. Now, the basketball and the baseball and the football and all of that, I understand. But how in the world, briefly, Donald, did you do golf, archery, and billiards
try anything
on the radio?
Yeah, well, what we did, Dick, the city tournaments years back, Jim Stefanich was in the final, in fact, in this particular. And I had Roger Carlson, a fine a local athlete, and he was doing the color for me. We just followed right along, and we had our unit, our WJOL unit, just getting as close as possible to it, and we covered that for a couple of different years. And as far as the archery and the billiards, that's nothing to that. We had it at the Chalk and Q. And we just veer right down there and talk softly, and it worked out fine.
You know, I want to bring this one up because this is reminiscent of what we read about when we all went to school to learn about broadcasting. And I found out you were one of the real pioneers here in Joliet. Tell us about your first Pony League championship game won by Ingalls Park.
Right. 1956, down at the Western Union office. It used to be on Scott Street, downtown, years ago. And all of a sudden, we couldn't really afford at the time, the station, to send me out there to do the games. So they're going to park me in front of this big machine with all this ticker tape coming across. And the way it was, it come across like S1, like strike one. You fill in. Was it over the inside corner, over the outside corner? Whatever, you know, ball one.
And you just made it up.
Yeah, right. It's strictly, and as I said that, I know I can handle this job now. If I can do it looking at a machine, I know I can handle this job.
Bet. And
we pulled them through. They played Hamtramck, Michigan. Eddie Spezio and all that crew was on that particular ball club. They won the 1956 World Series at Hamtramck, Michigan, and it's something I'll never forget. I did it that time and never did it since. But it really, I think, proves something to yourself. I can handle this.
Absolutely.
And I did.
Don, you mentioned a couple of names, but how about, and I know you'll leave off a few, and we'll just say we with apologies, but broadcast partners through the years doing these games, a couple of names that pop up there.
Wally Nelson was one of the best. Tony Craig was another one of the real good ones. The fellow I'm working with right now is going to be an outstanding broadcaster, Scott Slocum. I work with, of course, you mentioned Tony Ray. Frank O'Leary and I worked together a lot. In fact, it was 1966 that I mentioned to Joe Novi and Jerry Cerny at the station. I said, don't you think it's about time that we give Frank a chance here? And we started doing things on AM and FM at that time. And we had outsiders coming in to do the games. And I said, well, we got a guy here that knows sports as well as anybody. Why don't we have him do the FM games? I'll be doing the AM games. So Frank did it for about 20 years there and did a heck of a job. And, well, right on down the list, Ron Gleason, who, of course, was a fine announcer. He's up in Chicago now with SCORE. Steve Olkin is up there with the NBC. I mean, I work with all these guys. Jim Bowles, a fine young man who was here. Larry Ryan, and well, there were 7 or 8 fellows who jumped in as sports directors after I gave it up 20 years after I started because of my schedule. I just couldn't handle it anymore. And that when I was starting to have my family at the time, I wanted to spend a little bit more time at home. But I'm back doing almost full time again right now.
Good. Who's your favorite announcer of all time?
Bob Elson.
Bob Elson.
Bob Elson was the finest announcer. In his day, he was absolutely tops. The greatest interviewer I've ever heard. He does just a fantastic job. I had the pleasure of talking to Bob a couple times, interviewing him, and that was just something else. And when there used to be only 5 or 6 guys going down the spring training, which I've been going down since 1956, down to see the White Sox and all the rest of the teams down during the spring training camps. I got to know him down there, That's when there was only Brickhouse and Bob Elson, and just like a half a dozen of us were down there every year. Now, as you could see this year with the Jordan incident, they must have had 400, 500, 600 people down there covering.
20 years of Let's Talk Sports Show, 20 years Coach's Corner program, and then you have something else. It's called the 10-Pin Topics.
Right.
That is still being aired today.
Right, six nights a week. Okay. And more, we cover whatever that means. I think it's a great privilege to be doing the show. We cover more bowling at WJOL than any other station in the nation.
That's right. And I know recently there was a fellow who, and I apologize, I forget his name, who was honored on WGN.
Sammy Weinstein.
Sammy Weinstein. But his show was what, once a week or something?
Yeah, he's on once a week. I think he's on 5 minutes every Saturday night. Yeah. So whenever I get a chance and I see Sammy, I said, I kind of kid him. I said, you know, you got me on years, but I got you on time.
That's right. Editor, publisher, Will County Sportsman, 23 years of that endeavor as well. That's been right along with radio. You've had this newspaper going.
It was just a natural. It was so many things. It's mostly a bowling paper, and there's so many things that are left out that I don't have time for in my program that the bowlers really appreciate. Somebody picks up a little split here or has their biggest game ever, 150 average bowler shoots a 200 game. That to them is the ultimate. And so I get a little bit of an extra chance to give them an extra pat on the back through the newspaper. It's a lot of work, it really is, but I enjoy doing it, and that was my major in school anyway, and I never had any radio experience, so I kind of blend them together. And it's worked out, I think, pretty good. Back
a few years ago when I had the opportunity to work with you in sales at WJOL, and a guy by the name of Jack Daly was there with us, and a few others, at around noontime we would go to a restaurant, have lunch, and get back leisurely into our afternoon sales. But Don Lattis, you had other things planned around the noon hour, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I say that to set the stage of how in the heck do you keep yourself in such great shape? Well,
I kind of take pride in it. Like I say, I might not be a physical gem or whatever or look like that, but I feel real good. I play a lot of racquetball. I don't get a chance to play as much anymore because everybody's afraid I'm going to pass out on the court. You know, they're all younger than me. But I get my 3 miles in every day. I get my little exercise routine and whatever else. And it's been like eating and sleeping for all these years since high school. I very seldom miss. At least 5 days a week I get a chance to work out. And they know I do it at the station. A lot of times maybe I'll even skip lunch to make sure that I get this time in to get that little bit of exercise and keep myself in decent shape, which I think possibly
You are. You've been active in the Old Timers Association, past president, and I know that you've emceed every one of their events. It's a great association helping and supporting baseball and sports in the Joliet area. Chairman of countless events, we couldn't even begin to touch on those, but the one that surfaces for me is your involvement with, I believe it was, I hope I get this right now, MS?
Yeah.
You've been involved with that over the years, and chairman and on the board, and supportive of that. Special Olympics, you've been involved with that endeavor as well. And the list goes on. I apologize to folks who are saying, well, but yet he was involved in this and that. I just can't cover it all. One I don't want to leave behind, and that was a bit of your history in Joliet, was your stint as owner. One of the owners of the Joliet Explorer Chargers semi-pro football team, where you broadcast the games.
Was that ever fun?
And sold the time for it. And
sold the programs, sold the whole thing. In fact, I sold programs for the high schools when they used to have their spectaculars. The 4 high schools got together too. But, well, anyway, talking about the pro football team, these guys were just a step away from the big time. It was really great football. We really enjoyed ourselves for 7 or 8 years during the 60s, had a lot of tremendous players, but unfortunately we just didn't have the fans come out as much as they said they were going to come out, and after a few years, as I mentioned, we had to give it up. But we had a great time doing it, had a lot of wins, and made a lot of good friends, and I'll tell you that those were years I'll never forget.
That's
either.
another endeavor you can do. After you get the boxing going now, you can
Right.
get that going
Get
and
another
be as
football team,
successful
right.
as the Cougars are up in Batavia.
Wouldn't that be great if Julie had a team like that?
Broadcast selling, and I'm going to do this one because you won't do this. And you are the longest full-time employee at the WJOL radio. You've covered more sports, events, and you've sold more for that radio station than anyone ever has.
You know I'm not lying either, Dick.
Yeah, I know that. And now I will tell you,
fact.
because I know the business, that this guy has individually sold more advertising on a monthly basis than some radio stations bill entirely on their own. So with that in mind, and the fact that you have so much time in the sportscasting, if we can conclude this interview with your best advice for up-and-coming men and women who want to get into broadcasting and sportscasting, and we've got about 30 seconds to do that in.
Well, I'll tell you, Dick, that question these days, and there's so many in the field now. The best thing to do is really put your nose right to the right to the stone. It's something that I remember the first guy I talked to in selling advertising. I won't say what the exact word was. He said to me when I walked in, and I was just a rookie, he said, "You couldn't sell me." Mm-hmm. And what I told him, as I said, "Well, I sure know where to go if I ever did sell it."
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. But well,
what about sports, Don? What about these kids that are looking at the career in sports? What's the best advice there?
The best advice is to know as much as you can about sports. Study it. Well, grow up. You got to grow up with it, really. In my case, not that I'm an expert at anything, but I grew up with sports. I loved baseball.
You were a participant.
I was a participant. Yeah. I loved to play the games. I was never a great athlete. I always seemed to get on the good teams for whatever reason, though, and really got engrossed into it. And read a lot, read a lot. Sports, it's about the only thing I really like to read is all about sports. People are amazed.
Gotta live it. Gotta live it. Don Lattis, you've been living sports and sales and radio. We thank you for your 40 years. We wish you another 40 years here in Joliet. Best of luck at WJOL,
hey, thanks,
Will County Sportsman. And that's been Don Lattis here on Profiles. We hope you've enjoyed the interview. Good night and God bless. Welcome once again to Profiles. I'm Richard Fredrickson, and do you like our new studios? Very nice, huh? Hopefully the show gets on or before Christmas so that we get to have our little Christmas tree here. A special studio, special time. We're streaming live at this moment because the voice of Joliet for many, many, many years is with me right now, Mr. Bill Drilling. Bill?
Thank you very much.
Listen, we warn him, now I'm going to warn you. He doesn't always cooperate, okay? Sometimes the cooperation isn't there. So seriously, William, thank you for stopping by. I know you have a busy schedule today. Today happens to be, I don't know when you're watching this, it could be any day of the week, 2 o'clock in the morning, when Schuster usually puts me on about 2 o'clock in the morning. So this is one of the coldest days we've ever had in the history of Joliet, I think. And Bill is leaving here. Did you play Santa Claus today?
Yeah, and I lost 10-6 in extra innings. Go Cubs. Anyway, yes, you're right. I was very closely related to the man, the jolly old elf, earlier today, and I still have glue all over my forehead from it.
As I said, cooperation is not his middle name. Bill Drilling, what were the years you were at JOL? 1980?
1968 to 1988.
88 was when the curtain
February 6th, the day that shall live in infamy.
Yeah, it probably will. It probably will. Do you remember JOL in the old days on Walnut Street, up on the hill across the street from Silver Cross Hospital?
And overlooking the beautiful J&E Railroad
And
yards.
that too, and
yes.
that too. And the Frank O'Leary Memorial Restaurant that was located right across the street.
He should have owned it, yeah.
Yeah, he was there every day. He wasn't the only one, though. There were other people that, a lot of stories that I want to share with you, and hopefully Bill will be the storyteller. But a little bit of background on Bill Drilling. Tell me a little bit about yourself before JOL.
Born in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the 30s. I remember the beginnings of World War II. and including the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. I remember that.
Wow.
And I went through grade school and high school in Minneapolis, went to the University of Minnesota for a couple of years and decided I wanted to be in broadcasting. So my brother was very successful before me. And I thought, well, I'll go to Brown Institute, which is very highly regarded, part of the University of Minnesota now. Yeah. And graduated and got a job in the Twin Cities suburb of Anoka, starting right away in a big market. Didn't last long. Yeah. People who are the last hired are very often the first fired. I found that out. So from there, Anoka, I went to St. Cloud. Didn't last too long there. And I went to Keokuk, Iowa. Didn't last very long there either. Sometimes budget cuts, sometimes...
Yeah. Were you the morning DJ, afternoon DJ? What were you doing? News?
Whatever they wanted me to do.
Yeah.
I never had the morning job ever until I went to Bismarck, North Dakota.
And that was your first morning gig?
That was the most successful thing I've ever done in radio.
Really?
Yeah.
In Bismarck. What were the call letters?
KFYR. When we changed the radio station to a rock format. It was number 5 in a 4-station market until we changed the ARB, the American Research Bureau statistics showed us a solid number 1 in both Dakotas, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, really, and eastern Montana as well. We had a 5,000-watt signal, 550 kilocycles.
That would do it. That would do it. What were you before you went to rock? What kind of music?
Well, it was kind of middle road, kind of like the Gray Lady of Chicago, WGN.
Used to be, yeah.
But they always had ratings. We had
nothing.
Nothing. Yeah. But they had me.
Well, yeah.
And I had an opportunity when the program director left to succeed in his job. So I was program director and morning man.
So you were responsible for it going rock?
Yes.
Oh, see? We're live streaming this. There are people in Bismarck who still remember you.
Probably.
We're watching this right now, so
that'd be fine.
Yeah, we'll give you his home address.
If I'm lying, I'm dying. No, the thing is that I did have a general manager who was rather up in age, and he didn't know anything about rock and roll. And I came from the Twin Cities and was pretty much hip to what was happening. The market then was a little bit different than it is now. I mean, it was the Mamas and the Papas, and you know, people like Elvis. And the Beatles were big back then. We're talking in the 60s.
Yeah, lyrics you could understand.
Well, easy. Plus, I like the music. I still do.
Yeah. The 60s had great music. Great music in the 60s. All right, so when did you get to Joliet, and why Joliet?
Well, they, as a reward, I was doing some television up in Bismarck, too. It's a state capital. And we covered both Dakotas with our signal. And I worked the afternoons and evenings, mostly on the weekends, TV weather, TV sports, and sometimes even the news. And they didn't have teleprompters, so I had to write my own cue cards. That's how long. And there was no videotape. Everything we did,
whatever it was, right?
Well, or kinescoped.
Yeah.
Now, there's a phrase for you. But anyway, I was reasonably successful for them. And they rewarded me by giving me management of a radio station in a bigger market, Billings, Montana. And we had a little corn popper there, 1,000 watts with a daytime, what do they call it, a restriction, so that we were on at 6 a.m.
Sundown kind of thing?
Well, sundown we had to sign off, but we could sign on at 6 a.m. And we had a country western format in the ideal market for it. And as a result, we soared to a solid number 1 against 5,000 watt stations all over the Intermountain West. And we had a great staff, too. We had a country western jock from West Virginia named Lonnie Bell, and he had his own band, went out and played at the Red Lodge, you know, and the Beartooth Boys is what they were. And he was a character. He was my morning man. One time he quit me. He says, if I don't get a raise, I'll quit. I said, well, quit. And fortunately, I was capable of taking his place. A month later, he came, can I have my job back? You bet you can, because there was a lot to worry about. I was also the news director there. When you have a daytime station and you've only got 3 jocks, one of them was a handicapped guy. So we did a favor for people who were disabled in some regard. And I know now it's very popular, but back then we had C.R. Leverett in his wheelchair, and he was good. you know, giving him a chance. Why,
Yeah.
you found out that he maintained the ratings. Then in our late afternoon, we had Johnny Nystrom, who didn't like C.R. Leverett. So he says, I'm going to fight you. He says, but I need a wheelchair to do it. So that we're equal. This really happened. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. And then a year and a half later, after we'd brought in some of the biggest shows that this area had ever seen, Marty Robbins and Buck Owens, and
Sure.
Glenn Campbell, and Johnny Cash, and the Carter family, all of them at the World War Memorial Building in
So we were a
Billings, Montana.
country station then?
We were country.
Yeah.
And we were building the audience the way you do when you've got a small powered station and a lot of big honkers around, you know, the KOAs and the KSLs from Denver and Salt Lake City. They're all bringing signals in there. So we want to be local, but we also want to serve their entertainment and interests. And we did that. And then I got fired.
So then you brought events in, and you probably said, now it's time for a raise, and then they said, goodbye, Bill.
No, they changed ownership at Bismarck.
Okay.
And a new captain can name his own lieutenants. So they sent a guy out for me to train.
Yeah, well,
Well, okay, and they gave me 3 weeks
Yeah.
pay and said
we're
goodbye.
going to train you, and then you're leaving.
Yeah, well,
that's a
anyway, I went
practice
back
that-
to Billings, to Burlington, Iowa. Bill Hansen's friend was operating the station in Burlington, and I
Oh.
said, "You got any jobs here?" No, but he said, "Mr. Hansen does in Joliet." So I'll be right over. And I skipped on over and got the job.
Yeah, was it the Harris?
Harris Enterprises, Hutchinson, Kansas, and they aced him out too. He was one time he was I think he was chairman of the NAB, and he was at very high positions.
Yeah.
Bill Hansen. Plus, he owned 2 stations of his own,
Yeah.
so he didn't hurt too bad. But when they sold all the radio stations and went exclusively to newspaper, which may have been a mistake, I wouldn't say that, but he was ready to retire anyway.
Yeah.
And I was retired whether I wanted to or not, because the station was sold, and it was sold to somebody that probably wasn't completely cognizant of the abilities of broadcasting. He was a former coroner, and he was very political, and he thought maybe if he had, and I don't know this for sure, but I suspect he thought he could use the facilities of WJOL as a voice for his political notions.
You think?
Me think? Yes.
Yeah,
And
there's
they
stories.
found out
There's
that
not more stories than
Article
that one.
315 of the Communications Act says that you have to have a fairness doctrine, which means if I say something about a Democrat, I got to say something equal about a Republican
I don't think
and
that's-
independents.
I don't think that's on anymore. I don't think anybody respects that anymore. You mentioned Brown Institute,
Yeah, you remember that?
which reminds me that most of us at that radio station were running around with third-class licenses,
Yeah,
but you had a first-class license.
that's right.
See, the third-class license, all you had to do is memorize, and you got the license. But the first-class license, you actually had to know what you were doing.
I had to take 3 exams in a row, all the same day in Jamestown, North Dakota,
Yeah.
and I succeeded. And now I have a first-class license for life.
There you go.
As a
There you are.
radio
The,
tech.
the stories of we'll do O'Leary a little bit, but who were some of the characters, some of the people that you worked with during those years at
Don
JOL?
Lattis. Don Lattis.
Don Lattis.
Of course, Frank O'Leary, the legend
Yeah.
of Lockport. He could have run for mayor and won.
Yeah, he could have. He
Yeah.
could have.
And he was the chief honcho for the parade, whatever the parade's called, I can't remember now. But he was top notch. And
Yeah.
we used to, I say we, I used to help him. I used to carry his equipment. I was an engineer. I'd hook it up, and then I'd figure, well, that's all I have to do until he said, keep score. So I kept score. And then he said, do color. So I did. And I worked my way into sports, and they paid me extra.
And they paid you, which is
Yeah.
good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, they paid me for the 24 accounts that I had too. Maybe you remember that. Some of the full-time salesmen were not too pleased about it, but I didn't walk on them, intentionally. But I had some like the Lumber King of Will County,
Yeah.
Alexander Lumber.
So you were able to sell the account,
Yeah.
write the commercial, and then produce it.
Dang right.
Yeah.
Notice how I cleaned up my language. Dang
The,
right.
I have a side note on Lattice. When I first started selling there, because I was a low man on the totem pole as a salesman, new to JOL, Don Lattis, now many of you won't know what this is, but it's a telephone booth. And he would go in that telephone booth in the afternoon with the Herald News, and he'd spot anybody who had a new ad in the paper. He'd call them up, and he'd say, "This is Don Lattis. I see you've got an ad in the Herald News. You want to be on radio? I got such a deal for you."
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he'd sell. And he sold a ton of advertising, both sports and other.
And you wouldn't want to stop him. He made a fortune for the station and for himself.
Yeah. Was he the, well, let me go back to something that was a lot of fun. The sponsor wheel. Was that on during your time?
Sponsor wheel.
The sponsor wheel. Tell the folks what the sponsor wheel
Well,
was.
Bill Kimball was the guy that was
The voice.
chief energy on that, yeah. And it worked well for years and years. They tried to resurrect it after I left, but you know, you can't do that sometimes. They don't recycle very well. But the sponsor wheel, every hour we'd run it, and people weren't getting rich, but they were having a lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Don Lattis took me into what was called the Central Grill on Jefferson.
Yeah.
To meet them. And it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. And there were 4 or 5 guys at the bar. You know, they were betting on the sponsor wheel.
Why not?
They were betting quarters on the sponsor wheel. I think it was going to be Turk Furniture. You know,
It was all done electronically.
Yeah, right.
With an endless tape.
You mentioned Bill Kimball. He had that real deep voice.
He was from, I think, Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
He'd been working with Buffalo football teams. Yeah.
Who else do you remember from those days? Both in the office and back room.
Annabelle Freeberg.
Yeah, Annabelle Freeberg.
The brains behind the whole
Office
operation.
manager. Was she great?
John Meade, the all-night guy that never
John.
fell asleep while he was working.
He had one of those voices too.
He was mellifluous.
Yeah.
That's right. And what else? Well, Rich Ramsden was the copywriter.
Oh yeah.
And he was big enough and wide enough to do whatever he wanted.
He was a big boy.
But
I remember lots of how will I say this? Intense conversation between him and Don Lattis, coming in copy at the last minute on a Friday at 4 o'clock or something like that. There were words.
But Ramsden was a creative writer and a good producer, so we had a great advertising system.
We did. The news department was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, what, 4 or 5 guys in the news department?
There was at least 5, and Bob Herrick headed it up for the last decade that I was there. And then he went to the city and worked for them. I don't know why he left. He was the best news director I have ever seen.
Yeah. He's still here in Joliet somewhere.
Well, he lived up in
I think he's in
western suburbs somewhere, too. He used to commute.
Who was the other? Ron Gleason, was he there when you were there?
Yeah, sure. He's still working for WBBM, I think.
He is. I think he's the director, a news director, a sports director.
Yeah.
Funny story with him, he'd never talk to anyone in the morning. He just put his news together, sports together, and he would go downstairs. We had that basement down there. I think he had his little office down there.
In voice training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when he left...
A-I-O-U.
when he went to WBBM, the first shift he got where he had to begin talking was at 5 o'clock in the morning, the 5 to 2 o'clock shift. I just thought that was special.
He was a good sports editor, good sports director. Larry O'Ryan. Remember Larry Ryan?
Yeah.
Taught school out of Troy and then came to work for us, and he was sports director for a while. Yeah. And he and I did a couple of football games by hanging up from a pole in front of a high school football arrangement. And when the phone company put the line in, because we didn't have any, no cell phones or anything, everything was done by line from Illinois Bell. Yeah. And they put our line on the closest pole, which means they had to climb the pole. Yeah, and actually hang there while you're doing a play-by-play. Frank and I did a couple of those games too, where the visiting sportscasters from the other team didn't get into the press box, which means in snow we got snowed on a couple of times.
That's funny.
Yeah, well, it wasn't at the time.
Not at the time, but it's funny now.
But Frank is a great guy, and I have a lot of respect for him. And he recently got married, like 8 or 10 years ago, and I met her at a Lockport arrangement. I think they called it Hall of Fame of Lockport or something. He got more awards.
Yeah, he has a lot of awards,
Yeah.
lots of recognition. We had him on a few months ago. You were there that night for, what was that night? I forget what it was.
City
Hall of Fame. That was
yeah.
the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And you were leaving as I was coming into the Renaissance Center, I think it was, the museum.
Yeah.
And I said, we're going to get an interview. So it took me, 4 months to catch up with you.
Well, no, you have been avoiding me.
Yeah, well, that too. I
But
mean,
you
that's-
just
that's
haven't
right.
successfully avoided me today, that's
right.
all.
I was walking down the street, and all of a sudden, here's Bill Drilling. So I said, okay, all right, well, we'll go and do this.
Nice that he recognized me. You know.
Folks who watch Channel 6, particularly at this time of the year, will see you. How in the world, what is the story about Bill Drilling and the American Legion Band? Wait a minute, before you answer that, what instrument do you play? And can you read music?
I play voice. Yes, I can read music. I played the clarinet when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
Okay, all right.
But it certainly wasn't good enough to get into the quality of the Joliet American Legion Band. They're all extremely talented
Yeah, they
people.
are.
Some old, some young, but all good.
Yeah,
And what they put together could whip most symphonies, and has.
yeah.
Now, how did I get in there? I was invited in by, I think, Eddie Perrieux when he was president back in 1978. Says, do you want to do a few gigs, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. And we did the first Christmas show 34 years ago. And I've been doing it ever since because there's an axiom that you keep coming back till you get it right.
Yeah.
And so far I haven't yet, but I'm working on it, Millie.
You've got it right.
Yeah.
Now, you not only do that one, but I mean, most appearances of the American Legion Band, you're there as their host, your MC, your announcer.
Well, in his past years or so, the director, the musical director, has felt that I would probably be more adept with my speaking ability than he is. The guy's a musical wizard, but Tom Drake
Yeah.
is probably not, or doesn't want to be a spokesman. He's had to do that for many years. You know, he had 3 grade school jobs, a high school job at Romeoville, and then moved back in 58. He was a clarinetist for the Joliet Legion Band, and then he moved up to directorship in about 1964, and he's been there ever since.
And
So,
and you folks have been watching that because the American Legion Band may even be on later today or before the show. It's on all the way through the season, the holiday season, which is, well, let's see, the concert was December. It was a Schuster, wake up. When was it? You shot it.
anyway,
It was just a few weeks ago,
the
and you're
program that
watching
was
it
supposed to
now.
be on last night was preempted by the city council. That's okay. That's
No,
not
it won't be
important.
not when this is on.
Well, that's true.
Not when this is on, but we're going to have, I've seen it twice now, I'm watching it. It's great. You can watch that concert. It's almost 2 hours long, I think, something like that.
Well, there was a lot of talk because of the awards that were being bestowed upon Drake, some of which he didn't have any idea about.
Good.
And there are more coming
Those
that
are
he
best.
doesn't
Those
know.
are the good kind.
Yeah.
Yes, he is now. Is he retiring?
Well,
Or
they
not?
decided to make him director emeritus, which means he can come back anytime he
Anytime.
wants.
Well, he's got this new composition that I listened to. He put together like 4 or 5 different pieces into one. I forget what it's called, but it was phenomenal.
Symphonie Pathétique
Yeah,
by Tchaikovsky.
yeah.
And it's a selection that he's used at each of the venues that he left. The 3 grade schools, the high school, Romeoville High. Well, the last thing he played before he gave his baton back to the school was that particular selection. Symphony
Well, it was
Pathétique,
beautiful. And you
which
talk
doesn't
about,
mean pathetic. it means something a lot more dear and rich and
well, when you
loving.
listen to that, then you go back to your comment earlier about it could compete against any symphonic orchestra.
Without a
because
doubt.
it is phenomenal.
Without
it
a
really
doubt.
is, and all ages. And it's kind of it's sort of a look at Joliet and Will County. It's just every color and blend and shade and sex and generation in that band. It's
Did you
great.
see all of that?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Was it a pretty good turnout for the concert?
Well, we had some rough weather, and
yeah.
although it was nearly sold out as far as the tickets are gone,
Not everyone showed up there.
well, when you give tickets for foodstuffs, you know,
Yeah.
and a lot of canned goods, but the people gave the canned goods, and the weather was so tough that maybe there was only 1,500 there.
Only 1,500. That's a really good turnout. Any show would be very happy to get 1,500. I think this crazy, I'll retract that statement. The annual It's a Wonderful Life by the personalities of Alpha Media and a few people like Larry Walsh and a few others. I think they had 1,200 people there. So
They've got a good thing going there.
yeah, they do.
Radio
Have you ever
broadcast.
seen that? Have you ever watched that?
Well, sure.
Yeah. Speaking of being fired, I did that 1 year. They let me be the announcer for 1 year, and they never asked me back. Never asked me back.
You can't improve on perfection, that's why.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
Think something of it.
Speaking of perfection, tell me about your wife.
Well, where do you want me to begin? She's younger than I am. She's better looking than I am, smarter than I am. She's my boss, and she's a Christmas director, too. Drive by and take a look at the yard.
So there you go. Your daughter, who I remember as a little girl, but I also watched her progress in terms of maturity and leadership. You obviously recruited her into the Lions Club.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, and she then followed your footsteps.
More than that.
Yeah.
I was president in 1995. She was the president in 2000, and she was the governor of District 1B, the whole shooting match, about 4 or 5 years later. So she's a past district governor of the Lions Club. And
Good for her.
well, it's an honor, especially if you realize as a Lion how big that area is.
Yeah.
And she's very active in Lions yet,
Yeah.
and still in the library. She's running the second floor downtown at the library.
Great. Yeah.
And she's getting old.
She is. Cut that part out. Cut that part out.
Oh, she's born in 1964.
Cut that part out.
And the reason I mentioned that is because I remember it was about 6 p.m. and I was watching Huntley Brinkley.
Huntley Brinkley.
There you go.
The,
She knows that.
She, you got her into Lions Club, but how did you get in the Lions Club?
Jack Carlson, the funeral director, was a good friend of Bill Hansen's, and he used to listen to
bowling team together.
Yeah, and those are days gone, you know.
The service club
But
bowling team.
anyway, Jack Carlson, past president, asked me to join, and Hansen wanted to pay the dues, so now I pay my own dues. I want you to know that. Anyway, it's a wonderful organization, and just like the Exchange Club for you and the Rotary and some of those other wonderful service
We've got
organizations.
great clubs and outreach here in Joliet. You mentioned Bill Hansen again. When I interviewed O'Leary, he told me something I did not realize, that Bill Hansen actually carried his stuff when Frank was first starting doing the sports.
Yeah.
That Hansen would be the engineer, that he would take the suitcase
Most of the time
and
it
the Marty
was
unit and stuff.
Bill Hansen's boys.
Well, they did some of that too.
They did a lot of that.
All of
yeah.
that. Mike
And
Hansen, the attorney that everyone sees.
the most prominent of attorneys in good old Joliet, and a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
He's had some losses and some heartaches, but
Oh yeah.
he's a mainstay, a pillar of the Cathedral of St. Raymond, too.
So as a JOL alum,
Yes.
the radio today versus radio of yesteryear, big difference.
Oh, gosh, yes. So much programming comes from the sky, satellite.
Yeah.
And morning men usually survive. The rest of them come from, whatever the satellite provider might be, you know. And some of them are pretty risque. I won't mention any names. But
Yeah. It's you have financial, you have the political, satellite-driven programming. The days of you being on in the morning and Frank coming in, what, at 10 o'clock or something?
At 9 o'clock.
At 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
What did he go, 9 to 12?
I think he did, yeah. He did that phone forum first.
Yeah.
Then he did the interview show from Al's. in a select booth where Sharon and I always like to sit, just to remember.
We use that booth from time to time for the show.
Yeah.
And now I remember.
Yeah.
'Cause Schuster always said, no, we want to have that booth right over there. So
Yep.
now we know the history of that booth.
That's where the one you sit down, they plug you in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's next for Bill Drilling?
Probably nothing except retirement.
Well, what are you retiring from?
I'm retiring from education.
Yes. All right.
Oh, what a lead in, huh? God, you're a good
Transition
interviewer.
from a morning guy on JOL, and
Right.
then, you know, all of a sudden I find out, well, the guy is teaching classes. What? Well, how did that take place?
Well, I was very satisfied with my job at WJOL. And for the 20 years I was there, we improved the ratings of
Yeah.
JOL to a point where in one of the ARB ratings, we were 9th in the Chicago area. There are 6 50,000 watt stations. JOL doesn't
Yeah.
come close to that.
No.
We never put a signal into Chicago, yet we had that dominance locally that moved us to number 9 throughout the entire metro area,
Yeah.
which meant big sales. And you remember big sales meant AAA drive time? You don't see that in broadcasting anymore.
No.
But I was proud of that. And we moved the commercial total up from the NAB authorized 18 to 21 commercial minutes and got away with it.
Yeah.
Because somebody must have been doing, Herrick was doing a terrific job with the news, for one thing.
Yeah.
And my basics are humor and weather.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's what,
it was a good morning show with the news, the sports, the weather. It was local radio. And this is a little background because I know a little bit about the ARB. To be able to be 9th or even 10th in the Chicago, what's called ADI, area of direct influence, you have to have what in those days were called diaries. And people would fill these diaries out. Well, Chicago area might have 60 diaries. Will County would have like 2 or 3. And we were expected to, you know, because as a salesman, they were always, well, what kind of numbers do you have? You know, where are you at with the Chicago stations? And, you know, it's really a challenge, you know, only 2 or 3. But I wasn't there when you reached the number 9 spot, because we were at a spot where we were trying to get back up into that area. But we had plenty of local listeners, and the station, it's years ago now, and I can say this because I happen to know that, I don't know what year it was, but I know that the standalone WJOL AM, not the FM counterpart, the AM, was a $1 million a year revenue, gross revenue station, which was amazing.
well, it was a lot more than that when I left.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't exclusively my responsibility.
No.
However, I contributed to it. I'm happy
Yeah.
with that.
It's a good station, and they had profit sharing, and it was a good place to work.
And you
So-
know, we had the morning hymn.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I
and
thought
the
would-
national anthem went on in the morning.
Well, only when we signed on.
Yeah.
And John Meade had the all-night show for
Yeah.
the last 15 years. But the national anthem, the morning hymn was part of what I thought might be very appropriate, because the first thing I did when I came to the market was to find out what the religious balance was, and I found out it was 67% Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
That'll work, and it did.
Yeah.
And then first thing that was removed when the new ownership came was
Get that prayer out of there.
get that stuff out of there. Let's be agnostic anyway. You know.
Yeah.
And whatever it was, it didn't work very well. And so they went through a raft of owners, one from Detroit.
A lot of
yeah.
different ownerships.
Yeah, that's
Today,
too
the
bad.
ownership is Alpha Media.
Yeah.
I think they own like 300 radio stations.
That's right. It used to be limited to 7.
Yeah, yeah, those days are long gone. But
Well-
you've distracted me again, Mr.
Oh, I did.
Drilling.
You want to talk about education?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I decided I was going to go to school while I was still at the radio station. So I finished my bachelor's degree. And then I thought, well, as long as I got spare time, and, you know, I might as well go to Governor's State and get a master's degree. So I did, in health sciences. And that was kind of interesting. So I went back and got a psychology degree, master's. And then I went back and I thought, well, I'll get a certificate in chemical dependency. So I did. So I've got a raft, I've got more degrees in the thermometer, you know. But do they make any money for me now? No. Did they make any money for me then? No. I worked as an adjunct for Lewis University, University of St. Francis, and for a long time with JJC. And at JJC, they have a union for adjuncts, so I had job protection. And that made me feel good. Also, the pay wasn't too bad. Adjuncts are disposable people. If you ever get an adjunct job, you don't plan to keep it for a lifetime.
I've had an adjunct job all my life.
Well, I'm talking about education.
Yeah.
And I started out in education at the college level by going to Dwight, the women's maximum security prison.
Oh, yeah.
Lewis sent me down there. And then Lewis dropped the program, but then they took me back to their main campus. Then I went to the University of St. Francis because I figured, well, better deal, you know, and the opportunities were better. And sometimes those things don't work out the way you want them. So we went to JUCO as often as they gave me an assignment. Yeah. So I was all over the county and into Morris and Dwight and Coal City, teaching wherever they sent me. And I never had so much fun.
Yeah. Well, you spent most of your time with Joliet Junior College?
I think so, yeah. I got a pension from them.
Well, then, there you go.
Yeah, I'm not getting rich, but Social Security helps too. Now, what am I doing with my time today? Well, Legion Band has taken a considerable amount of time because I'm interested in it. I love music. Well, that makes sense. And I like to talk, and that too makes sense. Don't make any dollars anymore, though. Darn.
Well, you just have to pay taxes on those anyway, so what the heck?
Let me tell you, I still figure my own taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hope the IRS is not watching this or
Well, they can watch.
This.
I don't cheat. Okay. Next question.
Well, here's my question.
Okay.
And here's what I'd like you to do as we close out here. There are a lot of young, I watch Channel 6 because the St. Francis and Lewis, well, mostly St. Francis has a radio television department.
They do, yes.
Lawrence is there teaching those kids. And they watch Channel 6. And I would like you to look in the camera right there and to give some advice to some of these young students at Lewis, at St. Francis, at Joliet Junior College, not so much on the courses that you taught, but on your experiences for 2 decades and a few days after that of being in radio and broadcasting. And those years prior to JOL gave you the experience and the expertise that you have to look back on. If you're looking at those folks out there, looking at maybe their kids going to school or vocational school, what would your advice be?
Don't get a student loan.
That's really good advice.
If you've got a rich relative,
Other than that,
go there first.
Well, here's what you do. You go your 2 years at Joliet Junior College, and then you transfer someplace.
JJC is a wonderful opportunity, and I had some remarkable help there. The guy that was chairman of the social sciences department, the historian, the guy that has had those shows down at the
Sterling, Bob Sterling.
Bob Sterling. He's in Colorado now, but he was my department chair, and he gave me a lot of guidance because I was a green as grass as a teacher, you know, and I will always revere him, you know, and he's still coming back to town and making presentations down at the museum.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
So don't get a college loan, school loan. What other advice would you have for the young people?
Don't quit. Never quit. Keep working at it. Even when you retire, don't quit. Because there's always something you can or should or want to do. And if it's any one of those 3 things, do it as long as it's not illegal. Thank you.
Okay. Bill Drilling, thank you, sir. And thank you for watching. Some profiles. Bill Drilling, the voice of Joliet for Duke, 20-some years. Up on the hill, Walnut Street, right across from Silver Cross, the old Silver Cross Hospital, and wonderful little shops that there were across the bait shop. And there was a couple of little businesses over there that where I used to go get my candy bars and stuff over there. Thank you for watching. We have more guests coming your way. You stay tuned to Channel 6, and we'll see you next time. Take care.